Today I want to talk a little bit about the messages that stories send us. Stories and books send messages to their readers. Some of these messages are loud and clear, and some of those messages are quiet and hiding. Usually when people finish reading Little Red Riding Hood and ask, what can we learn from this story? People mention the loud and clear message, don't talk to strangers, because the wolf eats Red Riding Hood, who doesn't know him. But today, we're going to read and listen for the quiet messages, the hiding messages that are lurking in Little Red Riding Hood that we don't always notice. But today, I'm going to show you how to notice them. As you read through the story, stop at the end of each page and ask yourself some of these questions. What messages is this story sending me about girls or women? What are the male characters like? What messages is this story sending about children? Who has power? Who's in charge here? Why? What's that power like? Who doesn't have power? What message does that send? So I'm going to start with Little Red Riding Hood. Once there was a little village maiden, the prettiest ever seen. Her mother was foolishly fond of her, and her grandmother likewise. The old woman made for her a little hood, which became the damsel so well that ever after she went by the name of Little Red Riding Hood. One day, when her mother was making cakes, she said, "My child, you shall go and see your grandmother, for I hear she is not well, and you shall take her some of these cakes and a pot of butter." I'm reading through this first page, and the story's beginning, and I'm noticing the focus on Little Red Riding Hood and how pretty she is, how her family treats her because she's pretty. One of the messages that this sends to me is, pretty little girls get lots of love and attention because they are pretty. So I might write that down. Let's go on. Little Red Riding Hood was delighted to go. Remember, she's going to see her grandmother. Though it was a long walk, but she was a good child and fond of her kind grandmother. Passing through a wood, she met a great wolf, who was most eager to eat her up, but dared not, because of a woodcutter who was busy hard by. So he only came and asked her politely where she was going. I'm noticing that the wolf is a male character, and the story mentions that the only reason the wolf does not eat Little Red Riding Hood is because the male woodcutter is nearby. One of the messages that this sends me is men or boys are only tamed by the threat of violence from other men. Men control men in this story. The wolf is controlled by the threat of the woodcutter. Let's keep going. The poor child, Little Red Riding Hood, who did not know how dangerous it is to stop and speak to wolves, replied, "I am going to see my grandmother and to take her a cake and a pot of butter which my mother has sent her." "Is it very far from hence?" asked the wolf. "Oh, yes, it is just above the mill, which you may see up there, the first house you come to in the village." "Well," said the wolf, "I will go there also to inquire after your excellent grandmother. I will go one way and you the other, and we will see who can be there first." So he ran as fast as he could, taking the shortest road. But the little maiden took the longest, for she stopped to pluck roses in the wood, to chase butterflies, and gather nosegays of the prettiest flowers she could find. She was such a happy and innocent little soul. The story keeps mentioning that Little Red Riding Hood doesn't know about the danger that she's putting herself into by stopping and speaking to a wolf. So I'm thinking, in this story, it seems one of the hidden messages is, little girls don't know right from wrong, or foolish from wise. Let's keep going. The wolf was not long in reaching the grandmother's door. He knocked, tock, tock, and the grandmother said, "Who is there?" "It is your child, Little Red Riding Hood," replied the wicked beast, imitating the girl's voice. "I bring you a cake and a pot of butter which my mother has sent you." The grandmother, who was ill in her bed, said, "Very well, my dear, pull the string and the latch will open." The wolf pulled the string, the door flew open, he leapt in, fell upon the poor old woman, and ate her up in less than no time, tough as she was, for he had not tasted anything for more than 3 days. Then he carefully shut the door, and laying himself down snugly in the bed, waited for Little Red Riding Hood, who was not long before she came and knocked, tock, tock, at the door. We have a picture of the wolf preying on the grandmother. "Who is there?" said the wolf, and the little maiden, Red Riding Hood, hearing his gruff voice, felt sure that her poor grandmother must have caught a bad cold and was very ill indeed. So she answered cheerfully, "It is your child, Little Red Riding Hood, who brings you a cake and a pot of butter that my mother has sent you." Then the wolf, softening his voice as much as he could, said, "Pull the string, and the latch will open." So Little Red Riding Hood pulled the string, and the door opened. The wolf, seeing her enter, hid himself as much as he could under the coverlid of the bed, and said in a whisper, "Put the cake and the pot of butter on the shelf, and then make haste and come to bed, for it is very late." The wolf has asked his way into the grandmother's home. He's dressed up. He's invited Little Red Riding Hood into the grandmother's home by disguising his voice and hiding his appearance. The message that this is kind of sending me is women, like Grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood, are foolish and gullible. Fooled by the wolf as they stop to speak to him, open the door to him. What's going on with these girls? Last page. Little Red Riding Hood did not think so. But to please her grandmother, she undressed herself and began to get ready for bed. When she was very much astonished to find how different the old woman looked from ordinary, there she is, getting into bed with that crazy-looking grandma who's really a wolf. Grandmother! Well, let's stop there for a second. Actually, I have something I'm thinking. As I read on, the wolf invites Little Red Riding Hood into bed because she is tired, claiming the grandmother. But Little Red Riding Hood is not tired. Against this feeling, but to please her grandmother, Little Red Riding Hood disrobes and climbs into bed. The message this is telling me is that children or kids do things to please adults, even when they don't make sense or are against the child's better judgment. Grandmother, what great arms you have. That is to hug you better, my dear. Grandmother, what great ears you have. That is to hear you better, my dear. Grandmother, what great eyes you have. That is to see you better, my dear. Grandmother, what a great mouth you have. That is to eat you up, cried the wicked wolf, and immediately he fell upon poor Little Red Riding Hood and ate her up in a moment. Now that the story's all over, I'm looking back, and while "don't talk to strangers" is one way of thinking about the messages I hear, I also hear the message, pretty little girls are subject to violence and preyed upon by men. Men hurt pretty little girls. Now it's your turn. This week in your group, which is in this case our whole class, but sometimes in some sessions it might be a small group, I'd like you to work together to find some of the hidden messages in the fairy tale that I've assigned, which is Beauty and the Beast. Post your list to our class blog. Excuse me. Don't do that. That's the wrong thing. Why should we do this with kids? How does reading aloud and finding the hidden messages and stories relate to the importance of reading aloud in school? If all books send messages, loud and clear, and hidden and quiet, what are some of the messages in other books you're reading right now? Stories that aren't fairy tales, movies even. Lots to think about. So go and create some threads about Beauty and the Beast, and then return after everybody's had a chance to do that, and start to unpack what this is like and what its implications are for reading aloud in your classrooms in the future.